Okay, welcome to another Helix patch creation experiment, I think I'm going to call this one. I had a couple of questions about signal routing and doing things stereo and setting up parallel paths and that sort of thing. So what I wanted to do is kind of go through that really quickly. Just different ways you can set it up and do some kind of fun things with routing and just the different possibilities, wet and dry paths and all that fun stuff. So kind of keeping with the theme of my last video, I'm going to take about 2 minutes and set up my basic tone. Just like the last video, I'm going to stick with the Vox. And if you saw my last video, these are just quick adjustments I made. Instead of doing a dual cab, I'm going to do 2 single cabs. I'll show you why here in 1 second. So still going to do the same cabs. Going to stick with the Vox cabs. So about 13. I'm going to add another cab block for the second cab. All right. Okay, so here's where we're going to start getting into some different stuff. Right now, everything, as you'll notice, there's 2 paths, path 1, path 2. But each one of them are stereo paths, but they can actually be broken into path 1A and B and path 2A and B. So I'm going to kind of explore that a little bit. So what I want to do right now, the way this is running, you've got an amp and it's running into a cabinet, into another cabinet. This is not the way you want to do things. You would never feed one cabinet into another like this. So I'm going to grab this block and drag it down. Okay, so now we've got path 1B. All right. Actually, what I'm going to do too is I'm going to pull this down where I've actually got 2 completely separate paths now. So this split is a Y. If you wanted to do an AB, you could set it to where so much of the signal goes through path A and so much through path B. We're going to keep it even, so it's just a Y split, which means it's going equally between these 2 cabinets. So signal flow wise, hits the amp, comes here, goes through this cabinet, also comes down here, it goes through this cabinet. So we just got a dry sound right now, but we're going through 2 cabinets. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to throw a couple of effects up on the top path, and then I'm going to keep this bottom path kind of dry and pure, I guess you could say. So I'm going to throw a reverb on here, kind of do like a, kind of keep things similar to the last patch for continuity's sake. So now we've got a reverb on path 1, but it's only on path 1. It's not affecting path 1B. I should say 1A. It's on 1A, 1B still dry. So now I'm going to throw a delay up here. All right. You can choose any effects you want. I'm just kind of quickly throwing effects in here just to kind of show you examples of how to do some of this routing stuff. Feel free, of course, to experiment and go wild with it, do whatever. So now we have path A, 1A, I should say. It's going to split here. It's going to keep, one part is going to keep going and hit this delay and reverb. The other path is just going to hit this cab and go straight out. So that's what this sounds like. So the advantage there is you got one path that's going to stay, no matter how wet or affected we make this top path, the bottom path is going to maintain a clean signal. So some players like to do that. It's called like a wet-dry mix. And the advantage of that is you keep one signal dry and you maintain a certain level of clarity through the patch. It doesn't get washed out and through adding different effects and that sort of thing. So it stays nice and clean and clear. So like I said, as you can see, this took like minutes to set up, and we've got a wet-dry setup. So I hope that makes sense so far. Again, you know, path 1A, path 1B, real simple stuff. So now, let's say we didn't want reverb on our delay. We wanted the delay to happen and the reverb to happen, but we wanted them to happen separately. Super easy to do. I'm going to grab this delay, just drag it down to the bottom. If you're using the onboard editor or the onboard user interface, you can do this by using the joystick, and you should be well acquainted with that if you have a Helix, but just grabbing the stuff and moving it with the joystick. So now path 1A is just has some reverb on it. Path 1B just has delay on it. So it's a subtle difference, but it's there. You can hear that, the delay and the reverb sound much more separated now. You're still getting both effects, but one isn't feeding into the other. Okay, so you've got some parallel stuff going on. Now let's say this delay was a dotted eighth. Let's say I wanted to run parallel delays and do something a little different up here. Let's throw another delay on. And the cool thing here is they're not feeding into one another, right? So you don't get delays feeding delays and you're delaying your delay, so to speak, if that makes sense. I'll just pull the mix down just a little bit. Feedback. So now we've got a quarter note delay up here, a dotted eighth here, just to give you an example, so let me play and let's hear what that sounds like. So here they got two different delays. It's not exactly ping pong sound, but you have two different ones going and they're independent. They're not feeding into each other. So it's kind of cool. It keeps it nice and clean. So just an example. Let's throw this back up here. And now we've got a completely wet path and a completely dry path. Let's see what that sounds like. So you hear how those delays are kind of feeding off of each other, and it's a different sound. And then we've got a louder, straight, clear path. You can hear that louder dry signal coming through too. So even though we've got more going on with the delay, you gain back that kind of clear, dry second path. So again, there's what that sounds like. Okay. So that's all well and good. There's any number of cool things you can do with this approach by separating out. If you want to go really wild, have a wet mix and then a dry mix, or like I said, if you want to separate out your delay and modulations to where one path is getting certain effects, the other path are getting other effects so they don't interfere with each other, that's super easy to do. So far, we really haven't, if we were in the real world, this would be pretty complex to run cables and set all this up. Helix makes this so easy. You can just drag blocks around and there you go. One other thing I wanted to mention was so far we haven't utilized path 2 at all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to send both of the 1A and 1B signals down to path 2A. All right. And the reason I'm going to do that is to show you that now what we can do, there's two things really that come into play now. So right now, both of these signals are now coming straight down to here. One thing is now we have the whole second DSP chip to work with. Whereas, I haven't really looked to see if there's anything that's, okay, like as an example, stereo drive pedals, using the amount of effects up here in 1A and 1B, megaphone's the only thing available DSP wise. If we go to mono, we got a few more options. But we're doing a dual path, two different cabinets, reverb, two different delays, amp. So we've put some stress on this top DSP. And for anybody that doesn't know, each path has its own DSP chip. So as I refer to a different DSP, that's what I'm talking about. Each path has its own separate chip that it's working with. So anything you do in path 1A and B has no pull on the power being used in 2A or 2A and 2B if you split this one too. Okay, so what this allows us to do now that we have both both of these coming down here is now we've got the full power of the second DSP chip, and also anything that we do down here with it set up with just 2A is going to affect the complete signal. So as an example, let's do like a particle verb, something kind of really spacey, right? So now this is going to affect the entire signal. So if you have kind of path A and 1B set up the way you want, but there's certain effects that you want just to cover the whole range, rather than trying to duplicate it, and like say if you wanted the whole sound to be covered in the particle verb, if all you had was this, you'd have to put them in both paths. Or you'd have to, I guess you could do, yeah, I think so. I guess you could do, actually, you could move this back up and then get creative and put a particle verb after that to kind of achieve the same results, but then again, you're facing the DSP issues where you're going to be running out of horsepower. So this offers a kind of a nice solution to where you can have all this available horsepower down here to work with. I hope that makes sense. Now, you can also split this bottom into 2A and 2B. So let's do something different here. Let's do an octaverb, and let's pull this down. So now we have 2A and 2B. Let me show you what I did just there. Okay, so by default, when you pull this down, it just makes a split. When you pull the split down, now you've got two inputs. So now I can come up here and say, instead of 2A, let's go to 2B. So, and then same thing here. I can come over to this split where it's merging them if I want to. I mean, I don't have to, but I can pull this down. And so now this bottom section becomes a continuation of the top section, if that makes sense. We've got path 1A and 1B. They lead now to corresponding paths 2A and 2B. So we still have our kind of two discrete paths. Sorry, my OCD's kicking in. I want those to line up physically. There's no reason sonically to move that, but I just wanted to see them line up. So now, like I said, we carry on that two discrete path kind of topology we have up here, and now it's following down to the bottom. So now we've got a particle verb on 2A and an octaverb on 2B. Which of course we could turn off one. You know, one or the other. The whole point of this really isn't going for a particular sound. It's just to show you how to manage the different signal paths and kind of do what you want to do with them. The only caveat I would mention here is when you think about drive pedals or anything going before the amp, you pretty much have to, that's going to feed into the amp, which is what you want. I mean, you wouldn't want to put a drive pedal down here between the amp and the cabinet anyway. So you still kind of have a section. You could shift this whole thing over to the right a little bit to give yourself a little more room to have some pedals here, depending on how much DSP you want to use up. But once the amp hits this Y split, right now the way it's set up, we've got two discrete paths all the way out. And you could come down here and pan these hard left and hard right if you had a stereo set up, if you're running into 2 amps or if you're running into 2 channels on a mixer and you want it to be really true stereo, you can pan this one hard left, pan this one hard right, and you literally will have a true stereo set up, and it just gives you a great amount of flexibility there. So I hope this answers some questions that some of you had about how to kind of do parallel things, how to do stereo things, routing questions, all that sort of stuff. It's really cool, I think, to be able to allow the top path to handle the amp horsepower stuff. And, you know, we could move, like, this delay and reverb. We can move all this down to the bottom and give us more horsepower for doing drive pedals and stuff up here. And then just have all our delay and modulation and reverb happening on the bottom. And it'd be a great way to manage the DSP and get you probably any kind of setup you want, really. I doubt you would max out the bottom row without, you know, the top row handling the amp. I doubt you're going to max out the bottom row. I mean, I'm sure you could think of something, but in a normal setup, you probably should have plenty of power to go around if you do it that way. So, anyway, I guess I'll post this patch on Custom Tone and put a link to it. Again, I mean, this is more of a template patch than anything else, than a particular tone patch. I haven't assigned foot switches or anything. It's just, this will kind of give you an idea, and I'll put a link to the patch in the description of the video if that helps out. But you've seen from scratch how I built it. It's not very complicated to do, and it's really a good exercise, I think, to do these sort of things on your own from scratch, so you don't necessarily have to rely on other patches, just like you kind of know how it's all put together and what to do. So anyway, like I say, hope this is helpful. Give me your feedback. Let me know if you found this to be helpful. If you have anything else that you'd like me to try to show you on Helix, I'd be more than happy to do that. Any other tones or you want me to go for, or configurations to try to set up, I'll be glad to do it. So anyway, thanks for watching.